Why avoidance sabotage peace within healthy empathic relationships? When you look at a healthy empathic relationship from the outside, it should feel stable, calm, and emotionally safe. But when an avoidant attachment style is involved, that peace often starts to feel fragile without any obvious reason. And what looks like sudden sabotage is usually a deeper internal struggle that the avoidant themselves does not fully understand. Avoidants do not usually enter relationships with the intention of destroying peace. In fact, many of them are drawn to empathic partners because of the safety, warmth, and emotional steadiness they offer. But the very thing they are attracted to eventually becomes the thing they struggle to tolerate over time. An empath brings consistency, emotional presence, and deep understanding into the relationship. They create an environment where feelings are acknowledged rather than dismissed. And this level of emotional stability should ideally feel healing for an avoidant partner. But here is where the conflict begins internally. For an avoidant, emotional peace can slowly start to feel like emotional pressure. Not because the empath is doing anything wrong, but because calmness requires presence, and presence requires emotional engagement. At first, the avoidant enjoys the safety of the connection. They feel understood, accepted, and even emotionally relieved in the early stages. But as the relationship deepens, their nervous system starts to react differently to closeness. Peace begins to feel unfamiliar. An unfamiliar emotional safety can unconsciously trigger discomfort in someone who is used to emotional unpredictability. So instead of relaxing into the relationship, they begin to create distance without fully realizing why. This is where sabotage often begins in subtle ways. They may become less responsive, more distracted, or emotionally inconsistent without any clear external cause. To the empath, this shift feels confusing because nothing in the relationship structure seems broken. The empath responds with more care, more patience, and more emotional understanding. But for the avoidant, this increased emotional presence can sometimes intensify their internal pressure. Because they begin to feel seen in ways that require emotional accountability they are not ready for. Avoidants often struggle with emotional responsibility, even when they care deeply. So when a relationship becomes too stable, too open, or too emotionally transparent, they start to feel trapped within their own reactions. And instead of communicating this directly, they unconsciously withdraw. This withdrawal is not always about the partner. It is often about their internal fear of being fully emotionally known and then expected to remain consistent within that emotional space. Consistency feels demanding because it requires sustained emotional awareness. So peace becomes something they unintentionally disrupt. They may create small conflicts over insignificant issues, or they may shut down emotionally at moments when connection is actually deepening. To the empath, these shifts feel like sudden emotional instability because they are giving more love, more patience, and more understanding than ever before. Yet the emotional closeness seems to trigger distance instead of bonding. The core reason is that avoidants are often more comfortable with emotional intensity than emotional stability. Intensity gives them something to react to and escape from, but stability requires them to remain present and accountable in a calm, emotional environment. And accountability is where their internal discomfort increases. Because peace in a relationship does not just mean absence of conflict. It also means emotional responsibility and consistency over time. So when things are finally going well, the avoidant nervous system sometimes misinterprets that stability as pressure. Not consciously, but through deeply learned emotional patterns from earlier experiences. And that is when self-sabotage begins to appear. They may start pulling away without explanation. Or they may create emotional confusion that disrupts the natural flow of connection. Not because they want to hurt the empath, but because they are trying to regulate their own internal discomfort. The empath often tries to restore peace through communication, understanding, and emotional reassurance. But this can unintentionally increase the avoidance feeling of emotional exposure. Because now the relationship requires direct emotional engagement instead of distance. Over time, this creates a cycle. The more the empath tries to stabilize the connection, the more the avoidant feels internally pressured. And the more the avoidant withdraws, the more the empath tries to restore emotional closeness. This cycle slowly erodes the natural peace that once existed in the relationship. Not because love is missing, but because emotional regulation styles are fundamentally different. One partner heals through closeness and emotional expression, while the other regulates through distance and emotional space. The most painful part for the empath is that they often believe they are doing something wrong. But in reality, they are simply offering the very thing the avoidant struggles to sustain long-term. Emotional consistency within closeness. Avoidants sabotage peace not because they reject it, but because sustained peace forces them into emotional awareness they have not yet learned to hold. And anything that requires that level of emotional responsibility can unconsciously trigger withdrawal. The truth is that avoidants are not running from love itself. They are running from the internal pressure that comes with being emotionally present in a stable relationship. And that is why even the healthiest empathic relationships can feel unstable over time. Because peace is not only about finding the right person, it is also about having the emotional capacity to remain present when love becomes calm, real, and consistent. And until that capacity is built, peace will always feel like something they unintentionally disrupt. And this is the part most people never fully understand in these relationships. It is not that the empath is too much or that the avoidant is incapable of love. It is that two completely different emotional survival systems are trying to exist in the same space. One person builds peace through connection, understanding, and emotional openness. The other person often protects themselves through distant silence and emotional withdrawal. And when these two patterns collide, even genuine love can start to feel unstable. So the real question is not who is right or wrong in this dynamic. The real question is whether both people are emotionally capable of sustaining the same kind of peace over time. Because peace is not just created by love, it is maintained by emotional responsibility. And when that responsibility is missing or inconsistent, the empath starts to feel confusion where there was once clarity, while the avoidant starts to feel pressure where there was once comfort. And slowly both begin to lose the very connection they were trying to protect. So if you recognize yourself in this pattern, the lesson is simple but powerful. Do not confuse emotional intensity with emotional security. And do not mistake distance for lack of care without understanding the deeper emotional struggle behind it. Because real healing begins the moment you stop chasing consistency from someone who is still learning how to hold it.